A blessed day to you. Welcome to my video class lesson. Just sit back, relax, and learn. Let's have the lesson number 1. As we go through this lesson, you will learn to first identify and explain the components of scientific investigation. Second one, identify the variables in a scientific investigation. And lastly, apply scientific method in solving a problem. So come on, let's start, let's learn and have fun. Hey young scientist, do you have any curiosity for something? Why is this happen? Or how these things created? So for today's video, we will talk about the scientific method. Isn't it exciting? Now, let's start with the word science. This may flash different pictures on your mind, such as viewing things at the atomic level using a special microscope, advancement in medicine, kinds of energy used in daily life, and exploration in outer space. All of these were explored by many scientists for many years. And so, what is science? The word science came from the Latin word scientia, which means knowledge. It refers to the system of knowledge, base of facts, observations, and systematic experimentations. The process of science is designed to challenge ideas through investigation. So this process is known as the scientific method, wherein a scientific method which we follow steps when making experimentations. The process of science is designed to challenge ideas through investigation. So this process is known as the scientific method, through which we follow steps when making experiments. A scientific method is a process used to find answers to questions about the things around us. It involves the application of scientific knowledge and problem-solving skills. It can be done anywhere. Now, what are the step-by-step process in scientific method? There are 6 steps in scientific methods. The first one is to make an observation and identification of the problem. Second one is to formulate the hypothesis. The third one is to conduct an experiment. Fourth one is to analyze the data. The fifth is to draw a conclusion. And lastly, to communicate the result. And so, let's start with the first one. Make an observation and identification of the problem. Scientific method begins with observation. Observation refers all the information you can gather through the use of 5 senses. You observe all the time. Some observations describe something using only words. This observation is what we call the qualitative observation. For example, if you were making qualitative observations of a sampaguita plant, you might use words such as flowery, white in color, and smells good. On the other hand, other observations describe how much of something there is. These are quantitative observations and use numbers as well as words in the description. Tools or equipment are used to measure the characteristic being described. For example, the quantitative observation of a sampaguita plant might include a height of 1 to 2 meters and leaves are 6 to 12 centimeters long. A good scientist is observant, notices things in the world around him, and becomes curious about what is happening. He is curious and a keen observer, through which observation leads to a question that identifies a problem. The scientist then raises a question about what he sees. The question raised must have a concrete answers that can be tested through an experiment. Example: do Sampaguita plants need much sunlight to produce many flowers? The second process in scientific method is formulating the hypothesis. The problem produces a hypothesis, which is a possible answer to the question or solution to the problem. It tries to explain what caused the problem observed, which is an educated and scientific guess. Example: Sampaguita plants need much sunlight to produce many flowers. Number 3. Conduct an experiment. This is the stage where the hypothesis must be something you can test. To test a hypothesis, you design and carry out an experiment. Experiments involve materials and procedure. A procedure is the plan that you follow in your experiment. Also, a procedure tells you what materials to use and how to use them. There are also 3 kinds of variables: the independent variables, the dependent variables, and the controlled variables. Let's have them one by one. First, we have the independent variables. These are the variables that respond to changes or enacts in order to do your experiment. While the dependent variable are variables that respond changes when the independent variable change. The dependent variable depends on the outcome of the independent variable. For instance, if you were measuring the growth rate of plants under full sunlight for 8 hours a day versus plants that only have 4 hours of full sunlight per day, the amount of time per day of full sunlight would be the independent variable, the variable that you control. The growth rate of the plants would be a dependent variable. And lastly, one of the kind of variable is this what we call controlled variables. These are the variables that keep constant or stay the same all throughout the experiment. For instance, the amount of water that will affect the growth, speed, or size of our plants. It is therefore considered a control variable. Next scientific method, we have analyzing the data. In the experiment, measurements are taken so that at the end of the experiment, you will have something concrete to interpret. Not all experiments give you data in the form of numbers. Sometimes, data will be in the form of a description. Also, in analyzing data, it should be presented in tables or graphs so they can be analyzed or interpreted easily. Example: record the progress of the plants each day. Note changes at a specific day and analyze the gathered data. And next scientific method, we have to draw a conclusion. Conclusions are the result of experimentation. It must be based entirely on facts observed in the experiment. It should answer your objective or purpose in conducting experiments. To state the conclusion, find out the result of the experiment. If it supports the hypothesis, give some clarifications if there is any. Example: after analyzing the data gathered on the experiment, we can now come up to the conclusion that when Sampaguita plants receive much light, it will produce many flowers. Therefore, the hypothesis was correct and valid. Note: is it okay if it turns out that your hypothesis was not correct? What you learn is more important. And last scientific method is we need to communicate the result. One of the important parts of the scientific method is to report to others your findings. You will help others learn. Example: a professional scientist communicating results by publishing on scientific journals, presenting using a poster, or presenting in a conference. And finally, those are the following scientific methods. Again, these are: first, make an observation and identification of the problem. Next is to formulate the hypothesis. Also, we have to conduct an experiment. Next is to analyze the data, and we have to draw the conclusion. And lastly, communicate the result. And so, as a conclusion, in our everyday life, you have encountered countless problems and identifying ways on how to deal with these problems. A scientific method is important not only for scientists, but also for every person, since it will serve as their guide to come up with an appropriate solution to the problem. It attempts to minimize the influence of bias or prejudice in the experimenter. In doing so, improves their results. So, that's the end of our discussion. I hope you've learned. Thank you for watching.
Using Powtoon.